This video is part of the PMD Pro 2 series on project management tools. This session is on the topic of a tool for participation and accountability called the Raci or the Raci, especially how the Raci can be better used as a tool in project management. These sessions are designed for participants who've completed the Project Management for Development Professionals Level 1 course and have passed the examination, and who are now studying for PMD Pro Level 2. The emphasis being made in this series on PM tools is to assist with the use of project management tools as a way to promote further transfer of learning with the intention of improving performance and contributions toward desired humanitarian impacts. Let's start with an easy question using the Raci matrix. Which phase do we use the Raci matrix the most? And the answer is that it's in the planning phase that we use the Raci matrix most. It's also, of course, used in implementation because planning and implementation are an iterative process. I've also shown that the Raci is used in monitoring and evaluation, and specifically in control, because the management of stakeholders and the communication to stakeholders is often an extremely important part of controlling a project. Finally, I put a box around the transition phase because examination of how the participation and the roles of stakeholders were actually used can be part of the reflection process to improve the future development and interventions. Primarily, the Raci is about managing stakeholder engagement. It's said that a project seldom works on its own. As the complexity of a project increases, the web of relationships expand until it could potentially include these groups: community groups, government ministries, suppliers, local NGOs, universities, colleges, institutes, faith-based organizations, and many others. The Raci's main purpose is to ensure that there is clarity regarding those roles and the responsibilities, authority, and the communication of the different project actors. Take a look at this graphic. I put question marks where the headings in the columns and the rows go, and reflect on the question about what is the title or the name that goes at the head of each column and in each row on the Raci matrix. You'll see that the answer is that in the vertical column you have a list of tasks or the activities and work that will be done by the project, and then across the horizontal you have the actual Raci: responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. And I'll go through each one of those in more detail on the coming slides. Looking at the vertical column first, I'd like you to reflect on this question: how do you identify the task that will be entered on the vertical column of the Raci matrix? And the answer to that question is extremely important and foundational in the project management literature and knowledge base, that you get the list of tasks that are to be entered into the Raci matrix from the activity schedule. The tool is called the work breakdown structure, and you'll use all of the details that come from the work breakdown structure, and then you'll assign roles to them. This particular graphic here is called a Gantt chart. This one actually includes more information than just the work breakdown structure. Occasionally as well, I've seen Gantt charts that have been expanded to include the Raci information, so that's a possible option. First of all, who is responsible? I'd like for you to reflect on this statement to see if you can come up with the missing word or words. There is at least one role with a participation type of responsible, although others can be blank to assist in the work. As a rule, this is one person. The answer to that is delegated. There is at least one role with the participation type of responsible, although others can be delegated to assist with the work. The point that we're making here is it's very important to have an individual and name, or at least a role that can be identified and linked to a name. I have one person who's been designated as the responsible person. If there are other people involved, then those people should be reporting or be responsible to that one person through the delegation process. In the second column, who is accountable, there are two blanks to fill in here at the bottom. Accountable is the one who is ultimately answerable for the correct and thorough completion of the deliverable or the task, and the one who delegates the work to those responsible. This must be one person and is often the blank blank. The answer is this must be one person and is often the project executive or the project sponsor. It's extremely important, again, to have one person who is the accountable person or the sign-off person, the executive, the sponsor. Third column, who should be consulted? In other words, those whose opinions are sought out. This is usually several people, and they are typically subject matter experts. This is usually blank communication. The answer here, there is usually two-way communications. The idea is that there will be people who are consulted, who are given information, and there is an expectation that they will read that information, use it, reflect on it, and provide some type of response that then will influence what's being done by the project. Finally, the fourth column is who should be informed, and it is those who are kept up to date on progress, often only on completion of the task or deliverables. There is usually just one-way communication with the informed. In other words, they are given information about what's being done, but there's not an expectation or an opportunity for them to provide feedback. These are people that are affected by the blank of the project. The answer is these people are affected by the outcome or results of the project. Often you have a larger group of stakeholders who are very interested in what happens and will be impacted or affected by it. That could be the recipient at the level of partners and or participants. They could also be at the level of your own organization or even from the donor community. The question I want to ask you now is, how many roles should there be? Should a stakeholder be identified for just a single role, or is a stakeholder allowed to be identified for more than one role in the Raci matrix? The answer is that a stakeholder should be identified for just a single role, even though we said that there can be multiple people in the informed and multiple people in the consulted columns. You shouldn't have any crossover between the two. You shouldn't see somebody's name in both of these. Every person should be in one column only. Of course, we also said that there should be an easily identifiable person who is responsible, and even though he or she may delegate to others, there's one person who is accountable. That's usually the executive or the sponsor of the organization. Where more than one participation type is shown for stakeholder or group, this generally means that participation has not been yet fully resolved. And it's often an indication that you, the project manager, need to do some more negotiation and discussion in order to clarify what the roles of those people who are showing up in a couple of different columns have. You need to have some kind of better clarification before you move forward. There is an exception to the previous rule that I just gave you. Fill in the blank here. Very often the role that is accountable for a task or a deliverable may also be blank for completing it. The answer is responsible. Very often, the role that is accountable for a task or deliverable may also be responsible. That's especially true for smaller and simpler tasks. I want you to know that as a possible exception to the rule that I just talked about. I'm sure that some of you are using the Raci as a way to increase participation that would bring about empowerment that will then in turn contribute to the success of your project. That's a characteristic of many international development projects, particularly those that are implemented by NGOs. Others use Raci in order to minimize the negative effect of those who want the project to fail. Ideally, we wish that everyone wanted a project to succeed, but there are almost always people who have a negative attitude or see themselves as being in some type of competition with the project. It's very important, therefore, to identify those people and strategize how they can be given a role or how their roles can be managed to minimize their negative effects. Monitor whether people stick to their assigned roles also. I mentioned that in the previous slide when I showed you the PMD Pro-Phase model. It's often very important to use the Raci as a control tool. You can look at the Raci and compare to what is actually happening to see if anyone has stepped outside of their assigned roles and what type of action might be necessary to deal with that problem. And finally, there's the aspect of promoting learning, and especially learning related to getting a lot of high quality participation. I'm sure that there are several other ways that you could think about of using Raci as well. Secondly, what problems are faced when you try to use Raci? First of all, it's time consuming. It takes time to determine and assign roles. It takes time, especially when at a point when time is at a premium. Some people may resist being assigned a specific role because they'd rather not have specific accountability. They'd rather be able to do anything that they want and not be restricted to a certain assignment. It's good to try to be more specific from the manager's perspective. Some stakeholders may feel excluded if assigned certain roles. You may find that some stakeholders want to be in more than one of the columns. They may want to be in both the C and the I. They'd like to be both consulted and informed. You may need to, for example, negotiate with them so that they are in the informed column and that actions or decisions may be taken without their feedback. Finally, I've seen this in practice, that there's a tendency to place too many people in the C or consulted column. Doing that can make any decision process related to change too complicated, and it can really slow things down. I want you to look at these three tools. The first of all, work breakdown structure. It's also called the activity definition, the risk register, and the log frame. And I'd like you to think about this question: what is or can be the relationship between these three tools? I hope that you came up with something that's similar to this, that preparation of all three tools requires effective participation by stakeholders assigned to their appropriate roles, that each of the processes, that is, preparation of the log frame and use and updating of the risk register and modification of the work breakdown structure, are all functions or tools that must be developed and revised with appropriate and effective participation. Another topic I'd like you to consider is related to this question: how might you customize a Raci matrix? By customize, I mean how might you adapt or change it to fit your own contextual situation, realizing that project management has to be adapted in order to be effective. it might be necessary to add another column to make the Raci matrix work, or to work better in a specific location or context. What additional column could be added? Here are some of the ideas that I came up with. I'm sure you had some of these and some other ones in your minds. You might need a column about who will be the supporters. They might not necessarily be responsible, accountable, consulted, or informed, but they might have a specific role of providing support. These could even be those people that the person responsible has delegated. You could also have a column called the verifier. These could be people who perform quality control to determine whether the products and services meet the agreed upon criteria. Sometimes we call them quality management people. You may or may not have thought about this of people who need to be omitted. Those stakeholders who should specifically not be part of the project. They could be people who want the project to fail, perhaps even they are hostile. There could be people who just might be troublemakers, could create some level of confusion, or be better off not being involved and might not even want them to be informed about what's happening in the project. Here's an example. Another column could be facilitator or coach. That could be people who are specifically designated to strengthen capacity and support the manager who is responsible, or the people who are accountable, or could assist with a group of people who are consulted, like subject matter experts. So finally, before I close, I'm going to ask you this final, very important application question. How will you, or might you, use Raci in order to improve your own project management? This concludes this video on the topic of the Raci as a project management tool. If anything was not clear, then refer back to the PMD Pro Guide. If further clarification or help is needed, then be sure to seek out those within your organization and networks, those who have advanced knowledge and experience for help. Continue to become more and more of a self-directed and lifelong learner.